Bro, they raided a Doritos factory and they found like child immigrants working it at the Dorito factory. This is a huge brand.
I'm pretty sure Tyson Farms is full of some of that as well.
Junkies need dope and corporations need labor.
Those are the two drugs that the U.S. is hooked on. You know, illegal immigration is illegal for a reason, and drugs are illegal for a reason.
Today's guest is a favorite here on The Connect, the one and only Ed Calderon. Ed is a podcaster, influencer, and former Special Forces officer from Tijuana. He's here to give us an update on the cartel wars in Mexico, including the status of the civil war in Culiacan between the two remaining factions of the Sinaloa cartel, the Chapitos and the Mayos, and how, even from his federal jail cell in the United States, Mayo Zambada is pulling the strings of power between both the American and the Mexican governments. And more broadly, Ed turns our attention to the rest of Mexico, especially the northeastern regions and organizations like the Gulf Cartel, who are engaged in full-on war with the Mexican military and the U.S. Border Patrol. This is about to be the craziest year that the United States and Mexico have experienced in generations. And nobody can explain it better than Ed Calderon. Make sure to check out his podcast, Manifesto Radio, and follow him on Instagram. All right, you guys, reporting from the front lines, my man, Ed Calderon, right here on The Connect with Johnny Mitchell. Why do you think drugs are illegal? I can probably guess why. That's a little simpler of an answer. Why do you think drugs are illegal, and why do you think immigration is illegal? Beyond the surface
personal responsibility leads down some dangerous roads. People shouldn't have guns. People shouldn't put substances in their mouths that make them feel funny. So that's like against whatever these reptiles want to control us, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like in my mind, it's like, hey, why don't you let us have this? Like, why am I not allowed to just take mushrooms and chill out because of the that I have going on in my head? You know?
Right.
Why am I not allowed to do any of these things? The fentanyl thing, you know, cool. Allow them to do fentanyl, but let's take them out to Slab City, you know, where we don't have to pay for them, you know?
Right. Well, you know what the president of Colombia said the other day? He goes, cocaine is like, doing cocaine is kind of like drinking wine. It's what's the big deal?
He compared it to alcoholism. Like, hey, what kills more people a year, alcohol or lines of coke? And I was like, damn,
he's point, and he's not wrong, and he's not wrong.
And he's not wrong at all.
But the thing is, it goes against Colombia's interests. He shouldn't be saying stuff like that
because but he's a lefty though, so it's like popular to like throw like say random horrible like that. He's a lefty.
But if coke becomes legal, they'll start making it in Mexico. You know, if Colombia loses its cocaine trade, there's thousands of people in the rural areas that will starve. They have no, like during the pandemic when they had they couldn't move any blow, but they had huge stockpiles of it. It tanked the price. And the then president goes on air and he says he told the campesinos that do the cosecha, chill, the price will go back up and you'll get your jobs back, because they were like going hungry.
Yeah,
these guys that depend on the blow trade. So it's like, hey, keep the party going. Don't keep, like the war on drugs like is good for a lot of people.
Yeah, Ford Motor Company, 511 Uniform Company, H&K Rifle Company. Yeah, all of these companies like that, the war on drugs too, because they supply on the government side. So they're like, cool. So they're noticing that the war on drugs is like, let's make it war on terrorism, because we can, spend money on drones that are now going to be patrolling the border more regularly. Right. Let's send soldiers down to Mexico to train them on weapon systems that we're going to sell to them. I don't know. It's
right. Because so now you have a double pop. You get a double pop if you're a government insider. You've got war on terror money, right?
Yep.
And you've got war on drug money.
Yep. I think the war on drugs is over. It's all war on terrorism. I mean, I'm hearing from the Americans, like the guys that I know, they're like, hey, like this seems familiar. This focus and expenditure now on this problem.
Right.
Like, what do you mean? Yeah, like when 9/11 happened and they passed the Patriot Act. Yeah, a lot of things were unlocked for us that we couldn't do before. And that's what you're kind of seeing now. It's like, oh, we can send a military drone to this country that used to be kind of off limits because it didn't have terrorism in it. But now it's, now it's like, now we can send like one of these drones that'll drop a Ginsu knife missile on you.
Yeah.
Mexico was denying that these drones were flying around for like a while now. And now it's saying that they are, but they're in coordination with the U.S.
Okay, so let's get to that.
Sure.
But let's go to the most topical thing that's going on that made press. Ivan Archivaldo, who is Chapo Guzman's oldest son, I believe, he narrowly escaped a raid in Culiacan. Do you have any insight into this? Why was he in Culiacan? Why is he being hunted like this?
I have some connections. I have some connections to the federal arm of this. Like they recently renewed this federal police force under the umbrella of the National Intelligence Center is what they call it now. So they're actually recruiting a lot of ex-federales for that unit. And that's like a lot of those guys I know from back in the day. So that's some of the information I'm getting is from them. And also, I'm friends now with this guy named Gafe down in Jalisco who does this. He's the Mexican Sean Ryan. He's this former Spec Ops guy that has a podcast down there. They gave me a lot of connections, and I've been able to hear this different side of what's going on. According to them, the priority targets were not. It wasn't Ivan Archivaldo. It was some of his top lieutenants who were, in some way, shape, or form, commanding this illegal network of cameras and security around the territories that they were controlling. So that's what they were after. They found these two safe houses. One of them included a drug tunnel very reminiscent of the drug tunnels that El Chapo Guzman used to use to escape. These things are directly attached to the sewer system. Wow. So it's like a classic escape hatch that they found in these. But they got two of his uncles, one of his lead operators when it comes to basically adminning the guy, the money man, one of his money men, and one of his very close parts of the leadership that dealt a lot with the some of these exclusive flights that they do. So they're close. They have large segments of the area basically cordoned off. They're watching everything coming in and out, and they're like, everybody on the ground is saying that it's a matter of time before they grab this guy. Like he's in the area.
Now, if they get him, he's, I believe, one of the last remaining sons to have influence in that side of the organization. If they get him, will that be the end of the war? Will that signal that the Mayitos have won?
I mean, that'll say, that signals definitely that the Mayitos have won. It also indicates a pretty interesting focus by the Mexican government on a single one of these factions. And it means that the war for Culiacan is over. Knowing the ways that the El Mayo side of things kind of operates, they're always about low key control. And I think whatever this next evolution of this, gone are the days of the fast cars running around Culiacan in the open, I think. So whatever this is going to morph into with the winners of this war, which I think are going to be those Mayos, I think it's going to be more of a rural presence and out of the way and quiet.
Okay, so do you think that given what's happening with Mayo, he's not only is he cooperating, he's now petitioning to be extradited back to Mexico for reasons that we'll get into. But first, is the raid, that their ability to get the drop on the Chapitos, what do you think that is? Do you think that's just good intelligence, good police work by the feds, or is that the Mayos finally influencing people in power the way that they used to?
I mean, there's three things that could be happening. One, all these planes that are mysteriously flying around Mexico now that are gathering signal intelligence have actually produced a pretty workable intelligence map as far as who is where and who's talking to who. And maybe they share that information with Mexico. There's been a lot of talk of back and forth about this new like burgeoning cooperation between two countries with the threat of tariffs ahead, which is not off the table for the Americans. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is that somebody ratted them out. And I think that is kind of the main narrative that you hear across the circles related to some of these social media accounts that are attached to some of these criminal organizations, that just the underground speaks of somebody basically betraying them and ratting this upper echelon circle out. And this new police director, head of intelligence, Harfush, he's a different type of leadership that when it comes to like public safety and police work in Mexico. Very smart. And it seems like as soon as he got into office, a lot of arrests have been made and concentrated around the Chapitos. And I think what we're seeing now is like giving results as far as the federal government goes. I recognize that they're definitely upping their game as far as what they're capable of and who they're going after, specifically focused on los Chapitos right now.
Now, is that the result of bribery? Is that the result of the old ways where, somebody at the top of the organization would be able to influence Mexico City and the top brass to take out the weaker side and let the more powerful, more low-key structure like the Mayos exist and operate? Or is after this over, is everybody a target now forever? Is it the end of the old ways where the top cartel got the privilege of paying off the brass in Mexico City?
What you're seeing on the ground is like a focalized effort against those Chapitos, and that is suspicious to most eyes. A lot of people will say how quiet it is on the new generation cartel front and how quiet it is on the Mayo front, like how there's not a lot going on as far as arrests or targeting when they are in the open. I recently posted a video of some people probably attached to Los Mayitos moving around in Sonora in this armed convoy recently. I mean, in the open. So there are definitely open movements of armed people in the area that should be targeted from the air, from a helicopter, or by some sort of military presence that there's all over the area. So there's definitely something going on as far as like focus. We've also, recently the whole Mayo Zambada letter that came out asking the Mexican consulate office and the government itself to intervene on his behalf and to protect his human rights, because his abduction and subsequent arrest in Texas by DEA agents is completely irregular and illegal, and saying that if Mexico doesn't intervene on his behalf, this will greatly destabilize the relationship between both countries, which is a weird thing to say. People can read into that in many ways. Some people think it's because El Mayo Zambada basically knows everything there is to know about all politicians that have been on the take for years, not just with this current ruling party, but all the way into the past, since he gained leadership status probably in the late 80s, 89, I think, is when he kind of rose through the ranks into a leadership position. So a bunch of pictures have come out of El Mayo Zambada's personal lawyer being given awards by the current ruling Morena party back in 2023, next to the president in some sort of campaign situation, and around all of the upper echelon of the Morena party. So people are wondering, like, what's going on? Like, why are you in all these pictures? Yeah. The president, Claudia Sheinbaum, denies knowing this person. He said, I met many people on the campaign road, but there's that he received justice warrior recognitions and ceremonies by the Senate back in 2003. So there is definitely a clear and open relationship between people that represented legally Mayo Zambada and the current ruling party in Mexico and the president.
Yeah, clearly they have a lot. They have many reasons to want Mayo to stay in the U.S. At the MDC, completely gagged, right, and spend the rest of his life in a federal prison.
I don't think they're going to let him go. I think the U.S. learned its lesson by letting go of that former general Cienfuegos. Cienfuegos was arrested on cartel charges on a trip to Disneyland with his family.
Can you tell us who Cienfuegos was?
Cienfuegos was basically the head of the army back in the Enrique Peña Nieto administration, who was heard speaking to certain cartel members over the phone and recorded, and an open investigation by the U.S. Department of Justice basically issued an arrest warrant for him. He was on a family trip after his tenure as the head of the army in the U.S., and he was arrested by federal agents. This was during the last administration in Mexico, presidential administration in Mexico, run by Andrés Manuel López Obrador and the Morena Party, who is rumored to have been funded by these organizations as far as his campaign. So he put forth this this envoy to try and negotiate the release of this general, even though there's all this evidence behind his arrest. The State Department issues a letter to the Justice Department to drop all charges and basically send him over to Mexico so he can face those charges in Mexico, is what they say. In the interest of binational relations. Mexico says, yeah, we'll try him here for these crimes. So when he arrives, he gets escorted to his house, and and he recently shows up in a public event in his full military gear, kind of like saying hi to the cameras in a clear act of defiance. Mexico's government says that there is no evidence, that we see no proof that he's completely innocent, that it's basically fake. There was a fake charge that they did on him. So that's kind of the history behind right now the way the relationship is between the United States and Mexico.
Mexico kind of the U.S.
So there's no way I think they're going to release Mayo Zambada to U.S. custody.
So does that mean he's out of leverage, or is he able? I mean, if he feeds them info on all of these different members of the ruling political elite, I mean, could that potentially buy his way out? Or
I don't know about his way out. I mean, there was rumors and people speaking about him trying to get out of a death penalty. He doesn't qualify for a death penalty according to some laws that I've read and studied up on, specifically because there's no death penalty in the country that he is from, so you can't do the death penalty on him. The next thing is basically sending him to a supermax like they did El Chapo, which is almost close to death.
Sure.
But I don't know what he's trying to do. I think he is definitely flexing. He's flexing with the comment about destabilizing relationships. I think it's a clear flex on whoever reads it, that he can basically influence and or talk about things that might destabilize the relationship between both countries right now. Wow. On the U.S. side, it's being pressed that the Mexican government's compromised. They haven't stopped saying the same thing. On the Mexican side, they say that we're sovereign nation. Don't mess with us. Don't come in here. Please respect our sovereignty. We're not working with the cartels. This is not a picture of me with Mayo Zambada's lawyer and multiple times online. Deny. So that's where we are right now. This stalemate. I think the tariffs are on there. I think the tariffs were put on hold for a month, and I think we're coming up on that month. Supposedly, the U.S. was looking for results on the Mexican side. I think that's why you're seeing this constant pressure and chase on Ivan Archibaldo. I think that's what they wanted to present to the Americans to see, look, we're doing something.
Right. These are the fentanyl guys, right? You wanted to stop fentanyl. This is the face of fentanyl. Here you go.
Yeah, just like they did to El Chapo Guzman. This is the Sinaloa cartel. This is the face of the cartels. If you arrest this man, everything will go away.
Right.
And they get imbued with this massive power. I mean, people have to realize this is one organization, a very battered organization, and now a very fractured organization. but somehow it's going to be infused and imbued with all the responsibility of fentanyl across the U.S. Yeah, which is people kind of should look into that.
Okay, so it sounds like Mayo, the best he could probably hope for is not getting sent to a supermax. Maybe they give him life, but he gives them names of military generals, politicians, everything he's got, saves some of his own people, and they send him to a USP. Something like that. Who knows? He's probably not long for the world anyways. First of all, who's running the Mayito side now? What's going on with them in his absence?
The leadership aspect of it right now, like I'm not too clear with it. Like I could speak upon what's going on stateside right now with Mayo, as far as the reasons why he may change his mind about going back to Mexico. As far as like I don't want to step outside of my lane when I talk about Mayo Zambada's cartel and what their leadership structure is. But I can't speak about the U.S., specifically the fact that he has many kids in the U.S. With U.S. passports, and including some of them who are already under witness protection. So the relationship is already there. There is no real reason why Mayo Zambada would have this. How can you say this loyalty to Mexico other than to just be belligerent and angry about the way he was arrested, which I could see that there's some anger in him as far as the way he was picked up and moved. The U.S. is going to use him as a leveraging chip. I think in a lot of ways, this has been planned out for years. I think his abduction and arrest were probably part of a U.S. covert operation of some sort. And like the way he was picked up and the way he was arrested is irregular in all of its nature. So like, how are they going to make that stick later on if it goes to trial? So there's a lot of holes in what's happening.
Oh, right. So he's got some action.
He has a lot of ways of getting out of that legally, is what I've heard from some people that I know that are close to that. And again, I go back into this whole position of how the U.S. is basically going to go the route of constant pressure against Mexico. And one of the biggest ways that it could pressure Mexico is through tariffs, and justifying those tariffs by this smoking gun in the form of Mayo Zambada speaking about his direct ties to presidents and politicians stemming back till at least 1989, when he kind of rose to prominence in Mexico, in the Mexican criminal culture.
What was his in '89? He's been active. He was growing marijuana since I think the late '60s. He was working in the mountains when it first really started to boom in Sinaloa, the state of Sinaloa. What was the thing in the late '80s that really shot him to the top of the pile?
The arrest of Felix Gallardo, who was basically this legendary cartel head that controlled vast amounts of the border territories that were being utilized to cross drugs into the United States. Right. You would see the fracturing of what then turned into the Tijuana cartel, and then the Sinaloa Cartel Federation, including Mayo Zambada, who had kind of learned a big part of his tradecraft through the years, starting from the bottom, then going to Los Angeles, then meeting this mysterious figure in the form of this former Castro police office, Castrista police officer who worked under Castro, that then disappeared.
Fidel Castro.
Yeah.
Of Cuba. Wow.
Yep. And then disappeared and then mysteriously showed up in Florida, and then married El Mayo's sister. Reeks of CIA, that guy. But so in a lot of ways, that Sinaloa cartel was born in Los Angeles, if you really kind of delve into it. With this fracturing, this is what we now get as far as all these families kind of spread out through the country, and some of these smaller groups growing and fighting. And the kind of the war that made El Chapo famous was with these Arellano Feliz cartel members when they fractured off into their own thing and started these epic wars that led to cardinals getting assassinated in airports and shootouts that would eventually lead to the arrest and or the murder of most of the Arellano Feliz cartel members. When people see Mayo Zambada, they have to realize that this is a guy who has never been arrested. He was roamed around Mexico for about, I don't say, 50 years, doing illegal. Not just Mexico, but the United States. I mean, he has many kids that are in the U.S. that went to visit him when he was arrested. So I could probably safely assume that he probably spent some Christmases in the U.S. without any issues, So this figure who was never arrested, never picked up, never touched for years, obviously had this open relationship with many members of the government, the military, and who was he friends with in the U.S. because there had to be a relationship there probably.
And he's just through the decades has just been accumulating a Rolodex of people that he has leverage on. Yeah, essentially from paying for bribing, from making deals, from giving intel on other members of the Sinaloa Federation, obviously, right?
Something that was not during my time, but you would hear about it, that when 9/11 happened and the U.S. was trying to secure the border, that there were phone calls made to different people, not just the Mexican government to secure that border. So you hear stories about smugglers being told to not touch or to report anybody with Arabic descent and or like they looked Arabic in any way, shape, or form. And the orders were coming from high-level cartel leadership. So why would they want to get involved in U.S. national security issues? Right. So you would hear stories like this at like when this is before my time, but you would hear stories like this, and you would wondering what lines of communication existed if the Sinaloa cartel in its territories is telling its smugglers not to touch and or to report back if they see anything Arabic.
Wow. So he acted like how Lucky Luciano worked for the feds.
These are all
during World War II.
These are all policed.
Well, no, this was in America. That's not even a rumor. That was that's an open, not secret, that in exchange for immunity, because he was Sicilian, he purged, because he controlled all the unions on the ports in New York City, and he purged them of Nazis and German sympathizers and like that. So Mayo is the Lucky Luciano of Mexico in many ways.
He's always very political. He was always very calculated. They say that during that El Chapo Guzman's sons were picked up by the New Generation Cartel, the New Generation Cartel territory, when they ventured off and went to eat at a restaurant in enemy territory. They were picked up by about 50 cartel guys. The rumor is that El Mayo Zambada was the one that directly negotiated their release with El Mencho, which is, again, this is a lot of high level cartel politics and things that I think other people couldn't probably pull off. And he was a legendary figure and is a legendary figure for a reason.
Okay, so today, what happens? What happens in Sinaloa? Have the cartels lost the social permission that they enjoyed for so many years from the population, from the civilians?
I think in some parts, yes. I mean, there's still parts of Mexico you can't go into because it's governed by some of these organizations. So that hasn't gone away. We're seeing a lot of coverage of a specific part of the world, which is Sinaloa and what's going on there. A few things that people should take away from that. They're flooded with federal officials. There's roadblocks everywhere. There's aerial patrols of gunships over Sinaloa. I just posted a video of one of them yesterday, sent to me by one of those guys that are kind of doing those patrols. There's technology, signals intelligence, there's everything like that, and there's still people getting murdered in the middle of the night. Wow. There's still people getting shot in the face, and they're still like executing each other's guys in the area. So, putting a lot of bodies in a lot of uniforms in a city like that, flooding it like that, doesn't do a lot but make people bury themselves deep. And what I've heard from different groups like that is just basically a wait and see pattern. So they're going to wait and see. They say the government has turned up the heat before, and when they do, we go on vacation and then we come back. El efecto cucaracha is what they call it, the cockroach effect.
Right.
You put heat on a very specific part of the geography, they leave. And after the heat is gone, they come back. Tijuana is an example of this. We put a lot of heat on Tijuana for the better part of like 6 years. People left, and then it's back on the most dangerous cities list on the planet again.
Right. Now is the whole of Mexico right now, you could argue, because of Trump's posturing, the whole of Mexico is having the efecto cucaracha, no?
Yeah. I mean, people are leaving on vacation at high levels. Every now and then, members from the media approach me to try and hook them up with somebody that they can talk to as far as cartel members and stuff like that. And I'm like, dude, they're camera shy right now for some reason, right? Or they're unavailable. And I think there's a fundamental change happening at a federal level with the way that some of these cartels are being gone after. There was a dismantling of a lot of the systems that used to combat organized crime in Mexico with the past administration, with his whole abrazos no balazos policy, which is like hugs, not bullets. Yeah. But this administration is like that. All bullets is what this administration is all about. And it was like that before Trump came into power. So it makes me, consider that maybe there's some sort of like actual official effort to go after these organizations. But like among some of the military members that I've been speaking to recently, that I met through my friend Gafe, and among some of the people that are working now at a federal level that I used to know that are still in it right now, they're saying that this feels just exactly like the kickoff of the drug war back in 2006 with Calderon. This sudden prioritization of cartels and organized crime, and this new designation of them as terrorists, allowing now being this looming axe above them, where there's a federal government that's screaming about national sovereignty and the possibility of an armed invasion by the Americans and all the anti-American sentiment that produces. And on the other end, a ton of Americans living in Mexico and making their lives down there. And this weird, strange moment where the pressure is on either this changes or this open criminality changes, and the people go after them and not support these structures anymore, or nothing happens and the U.S. decides to send some Ginsu missiles after some of these cartel heads and maybe accidentally turns one of these criminal organizations into Robin Hood and turns them into these folk heroes. So
it could have the opposite effect, bombing them.
Yeah.
It could turn them into how the Taliban is now running Afghanistan with some level of legitimacy in the eyes of the population.
I mean, you see this sentiment from Americans saying, like, why isn't Mexico excited about us sending our army down there?
Yeah,
that's because they saw what it looks like in Afghanistan and Iraq. Yeah. So they're afraid of it. And another aspect is we've been living through about 6 years of pure anti-American rhetoric with one president, and now this other president who's speaking about Mexican sovereignty against U.S. aggression. And you have a very controversial figure in the White House right now who is. He has a mixed reputation amongst Mexicans, and this whole aspect of the him being kind of a villain in their eyes. Right. So, if the U.S. Army decides to do something on the border, let's say, like a targeted drone strike of some sort, and I keep mentioning that Ginsu missile because I think that's what's going to happen. Maybe like I've predicted a lot of stuff that related to this in the past, but if I was a guessing man, I'd say they would probably throw one of these guided missiles that has these knives right on a cartel target's head. Ivan Archibaldo would be a perfect one if they can find him.
Wow.
But if that happens and there's some sort of collateral damage or
Yeah, an American gets hit. There's Americans living in Hermosillo. There's Americans living in Juarez even. There's definitely Americans living in Baja.
Yeah, or if it just hits a school,
Right.
And the federal government spins it as a, these guys are freedom fighters now, or I don't know. It's complex. It's not as easy as just droning these people out of existence. I mean, they have to be dismantled. And I think in some way, shape, or form, we're seeing some of that, but in a very specific, targeted way for a faction of the Sinaloa cartel that is dwindling and almost extinct. But what about these other organizations?
But the work has to get moved. Like we were talking about at the top of the episode, junkies in downtown LA don't care about a war. They're like, I need to get high. I'm literally sick.
Yeah.
Business doesn't stop. It doesn't sleep. And these companies need migrant labor. So how do you dismantle demand?
I mean, we know that this is a toxic relationship between two countries. This is what's happening. This is what it is. The U.S. is addicted to drugs and to illegal, cheap labor that it could use to feed its tourism industry, its sex industry, its manual labor industry. Like there's COVID hit and there was produce in the aisles. There was no shortage of that. So illegal immigration is essential worker status, basically. That's one issue, and it's an issue that the U.S. is kind of in denial about. They don't want to acknowledge it, I guess. The dependency on it, and on the Mexican side, they're completely dependent on the fact that the U.S. is there, that their families that go to the U.S. send back the remesas, basically send back money. So there's a whole industry and addiction there as far as money and labor and a symbiotic relationship between both. And these criminal organizations have become quasi-government agencies in the areas that they operate in. They build hospitals. They enforce mask mandates for COVID in the areas that they work in. Some of them build roads, pavements. So if they get killed or left, there's going to be a void there. Like who's gonna be supporting all these families now? Not the federal government in Mexico.
Well, so how is work getting moved? Because we know, we read about drug busts still every morning on the news. So they're moving product. So just start with Sinaloa, and then we can talk about other parts of Mexico that are really hot. My understanding is it's the actual business structure is mostly like, just take fentanyl, for instance. It's mostly independent fentanyl kitchens that are just labs dotted throughout the rural areas, the countryside. It's basically these independent guys who are contracted by whoever's putting money behind moving it to the border.
Yeah.
Is that kind of how it's working now?
There's a lot of independent people basically making product for a specific client that they sell to. And there's not a familiar tie there. There's not people actively engaging in meetings with high-level cartel operatives that are dealing with this. These are independent manufacturers that are working in shanty towns, hillsides, industrial centers, in actual pharmaceutical company settings in Mexico. Wow. Because they've long since invested in some of these industries and have, why hide the fact that you're cooking? You just buy your own pharmaceutical company and just do it there.
Sure.
So there's a lot of that. All of that product gets sold to very specific people. That's why whenever you see a brick, whenever you see any of these packages, they always usually have this, I don't know, like Batman logos on them, or like a panther or a scorpion. Those are the people buying. Those are the owners of this product. Right. So it's a way to keep track of what goes to who.
Yeah.
These are people that have already paid for the product. There are people that want to move this product upwards into the U.S.
That's right. And who are, before we get to this next stage, who are some of these people? Are these business people in Culiacan? Are these industrialists? Or are these people that are actually directly in one side of the organization, either Chapo's side or Mayo's
side. These are people. I mean, anything related to transportation means you have to pay off people. Means you have to have a route. Means you have to know people on that route. Means that you probably know one captain or somebody a bit more high level, maybe a colonel somewhere in the military that's going to be in charge of one of these checkpoints. So if you do the math, maybe you'll give them one load, but you're going to pass like 3 or 4 of them. These are people who are involved. These are people who are organized. These are people who are in the game per se. This is where the influence and presence and territorial aspect of some of these organizations manifest. Let's say I have a drug route that goes from a production site somewhere through a city, through a loading space where I'm going to try and put it on boats and put it on vehicles and put it on cargo trucks. I should probably know the head of police there. I should probably know the head of the Fiscalia there, which is the investigative branch of the police. I should probably know somebody in the Marina because they run the ports, and I probably should know somebody in the Army. So I pay off all these people. But somebody that's a rival of me doesn't want me to succeed in my endeavors, so he starts killing all the people that I pay. And that's how you start getting the horrible violence in some of these places where there's people killing each other's assets in these areas. And that's where the la mano peluda is present. That's where the hairy hand is, in these areas where you have to have influence, pay for influence and security and protection, and corruption at a local and state and federal level to be able to move your product, put it into containers, put it into vehicles, put it into trucks and loads, and figure out how to then send it all north. That is the basically like the last and only function left of the what's known as a cartel is the infrastructure to be able to do all that. Yeah,
it sounds like, right?
Yeah, and that feeds a lot of other things they do. I mean, that feeds money that I could pay enforcers to tell, like, hey, this is my part of the border fence that I pass drugs through by tunnels and by other means, by vehicles. I mean, people are really focused on dudes with backpacks jumping the border wall. That's sometimes. Tunnels are another big thing. And we haven't seen many of those being dismantled recently with all of this new attention on the border. So that should make people wonder. And cars. I mean, just everyday cross-border traffic between these two countries. The volume of drugs in these vehicles getting passed through from cargo trucks to just everyday vehicles crossing back and forth. And just using the mail service and using packaging services internationally. I mean, the product it's still going through. The border wall is not a security feature against drugs. It's just not. No,
just people.
Yeah, just people that can't jump and run.
Well, I've heard that the price has gone up significantly for human smuggling. I think I read it was like 18,000 is what somebody, a migrant who got caught, told a reporter the other day. Yeah, which is significant.
Yeah, and if you're Chinese, it's more. I don't know why. I know they charge Chinese people more.
Well, they get the good crossings,
Yeah, people are still getting across. Yes, numbers are really low, and only people with money are crossing now. So think about it in that way. Only people with money are crossing, and there's an urgency to cross because everything is changing right now. So it's Navidad, it's Christmas for some of these smugglers. Some of the good professional ones are making more than some of these organizations are probably making more off that right now than crossing loads across that border.
So the increase in price is kind of offset all of the people that aren't trying to get across now.
Yeah.
Like during the Biden administration.
Yeah. I mean, they're checking IDs at the airport, at the Tijuana airport, for example. I mean, immigration is on in Mexico. It's funny. It was such a, whoever heard about Mexican immigration services? Like, I worked as a cop in Mexico for about 12 years, and I got to deal with them like twice. They're a joke. They were a joke, I guess, but now they're Like now they're a thing. They're checking when you fly anywhere near the border into a place like Tijuana, your ID is going to get checked to see, and your status as a citizen is going to get checked,
right?
Because there's this now federal mandate keeping people to the south. All deportations are not going to be taking place all the way in southern Mexico. So no longer are they going to be dropping off people at the border in Tijuana. They're going to be sent all the way south. So there's
interesting. So is that why those migrant centers that they built in anticipation for all these people getting deported, is that why they're still not, they're basically empty? Is because you guys send them all the way south?
Well, it's the U.S. is flying them all the way south now, apparently.
Oh, I see.
There was a surge of migrants on the border, but I think they're changing tactics and they think they're going to fly them all the way to southern Mexico, which is, it's a dick move. And I understand, but it's like, man, some of these people are have never even seen the south of Mexico, and all of a sudden they're going to be finding themselves in the middle of Chiapas or Oaxaca, or I don't know exactly where they're going to be dropped off.
And that's, to me, seems like one of the last places. Also Michoacan, right?
Michoacan is lively still, and there's drones dropping bombs on cops there, IEDs.
Right. So that seems like the last, because I have a theory, and I'm going to ask you your opinion after I tell you what I think is happening. But I think things, just like in the US, Mexico is going through a change in systems. So the US is de-imperializing, even though nobody wants to admit it. Trump is bringing the empire home, and he's winding it down, just the way in 1989 Gorbachev did with the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And I think Mexico is, and then I'm talking like 50 years out. Okay. I'm not talking about like next year, 4 years from now, but I think especially once you guys get that new Panama Canal, Mexico style through, I think Mexico is going to be so opulent, and with Americans moving there, I think you guys I don't think it's going to be a criminally dominated society anymore. Meaning, I think it's going to be wrought with criminality still, the way Italy is, right? Like Italian mafia, the Camorra out of Naples, or the 'Ndrangheta from Calabria. They are doing tons of crime. They're moving blow, they're extortion, bid rigging, high-level white-collar crime. It hasn't stopped, but they go to prison for life. And there's much less corruption. There's a clear delineation now between criminals and civilians, and civilian society and law and order. I think Mexico's in the early stages of that, and I think it's going to get worse before it calms and gets better. I don't know what your take on that is.
I think Mexico is poised to be the next industrial plant of the world. So, this is Wakanda. Mexico is Wakanda. The instead of vibranium, it's the labor. We have I think one Mexican worker is worth like 4 Chinese ones. And China's kind of on a downward spiral with its industrial base. Mm-hmm. So I think in some ways people look at this designation as a threat of invasion. It could be that. I view it more as an attempt to stabilize their industrial plant, because that's what they want to turn Mexico into. They don't want the labor to go into the U.S. and live off the welfare system. They want it to stay in Mexico, have Mexico stabilize and become its own thing. This criminality aspect, though, that we talk about, I think there is a part of it at a very high level that is completely attached to the federal government. And I wonder, if we're moving towards this new era in U.S.-Mexico relationships, where the cartel is no longer an issue, where it's not a destabilizing force, where people can, criminality and all that is going to be what it is. But specifically, we're not going to have roving bands of armed cartel members showing up to a town, murdering a mayor, and threatening a president that they're going to blow him out of the sky, which may or may not have happened in the past. Is that going to happen without some heads rolling at a high level? I don't know.
Right.
I don't know, because there are high level interests tied to power. And some of these power structures, including the Mexican military and the Mexican federal government, have a connection there. So when the U.S. attempts to exert its force, who's going to be left standing? I don't know. I think we are living through the last stages of this narco culture. This open, in your face, rolling around the city with a tiger in your car, narco culture, which I got to see, and I'm so glad I did, I guess. But that's, I think it's over. So I think you're right. I think we are going to see an evolution of a more low key criminality in Mexico, because it's not going to go away. These people, what are they going to do? What else are they going to do?
No.
But I think the mass, in your face, open movement of armed personnel in militarized ways, and I think that's what we're moving towards as far as extinguishing itself in Mexico.
So does that mean that could that exist? Could that new society where criminality is all underground and they no longer have a foothold with the civilian population, could that exist without corruption at the highest level like there is now? Or are those things hand in hand? Do you have to get rid of the corrupt elite first before you get rid of these the worst parts of the cartel?
I think people in your comments are going to be screaming at me saying that I'm like pro other past parties in Mexico, PRI or PAN or whatever. Like, I hate all of them. They're all horrible. All of them are criminal.
Right.
All of them did horrible shit. And this new Morena party is basically a bunch of the people that left those other parties and joined this Morena party. I mean, it's the same faces. It's just a different name.
Right.
So there is something wrong with the Mexican political culture and structure. It's the same faces, the same names. They just shift and change colors constantly. And it is clear as day that there's clear ties between some of these government forces and some of the criminality that plagues people. I mean, why is the president of Mexico giving time on air, reading this letter by Mayo Zambada and considering helping him, when she hasn't agreed to meet with any of the madres buscadoras all across Mexico, these mothers who are looking for their kids in mass graves across the country, some of them unprotected. I mean, I've walked with a few of them. They ask for federal or police protection every now and then, and they don't get an answer. Why isn't she prioritizing them? Yeah. Why is this at the top of the task list for the consulate?
It's incredible.
So these are the things that make me pause and think about interest and who are they really looking out for?
Is there enough drug money left in Sinaloa to where the president, who's under a microscope right now, it would be influenced by? Like, is there enough? I think Chapo offered like $150 million to I can't remember who the president was. I think it was the guy who started the drug war, basically.
Yeah, Calderon.
Calderon. I think he offered him, like, they had Calderon wanted $200 million. And Chapo only wanted to give him 100, and I think they settled on 150 million. But those were the good old Coke days. That's when things were thriving. Like, now is like, can Claudia Sheinbaum really be influenced by this organization that's essentially just different clans that are all decentralized?
I think the new thing and the thing that has shifted is, and you hit it on the head, I think, is the pressure is no longer going to be money. Right now, the pressure is that they know what you did last summer. I think the pressure is people are going to find out just how deep this relationship was.
Save your ass.
And they point fingers to the other parties that they were worst before. Calderon was worst. Enrique Peña Nieto was worst. Mm-hmm. They're all the same. And I think that's what Mexicans need to get in their head. Like, it's not about, this party was better and that party was worse. It's like all of them are bad. We need to change everything like at a fundamental level, because there is no going into the future and becoming a global power. And I think Mexico has everything it needs. I mean, The Mexican people are resilient. They're workers. There's great parts of Mexico. Mexico is in all cartels. Like I've been to some places where these the communities, amazing communities, where like people give you the shirt off their backs. That they're amazing people, and they, there's no doubt who built those pyramids in Mexico. It's Mexicans built them pyramids.
So yeah, it is two countries really. It's a tale of two countries. So the Mexican government might really actually want to get Mayo Zambada back because it's like, let's keep him close. Let's appease him so he shuts up.
Maybe.
But I don't think they can do that. I think the only way Americans are going to spring him is after he spills his guts, and then they're going to keep him in America. I would assume.
We're talking about theory right now, and I think the only thing, if they catch El Chapo's son, finally, I mean, that would be a worthy trade with the U.S. government basically calling the Chapitos the main fentanyl distributors, and Archibaldo being number one on their list.
Right. That's
the only one I could see being like a worthy trade.
It just to me feels like once 6 months go by and America's in a recession and we've just forgotten all about Mexico. It feels like organizations will regroup, go underground, but just keep moving product.
They already have. Money. I mean, they already have. They've already changed flight patterns. There was a big aerial route between Sinaloa and Baja that is now heavily monitored, and they're aware of this, so that they're already kind of like changing strategies in that way.
Right.
I've heard of multiple communications being basically kind of now cycled through. They used to do that not that regularly. Now they're doing it pretty sporadically. They're aware that they're being listened to on open communication channels, so they're doing their best to like manage that. And everybody's not there right now. Like nobody's picking up the phone, so people are on vacation. They're underground. They're hiding.
So my question is, with this raid on Ivan Archibaldo, they didn't get him, but they got a bunch of people really high up in the organization. The money man sounds like his accountant, maybe one of his heads of security. Who's organizing? If I own a couple of companies in Culiacan and I also fund fentanyl shipments, and I can't get a hold of anybody, who do I go to?
I mean, you just wait. You just wait till somebody contacts you. That's usually what happens.
I see.
Again, I saw something similar to this happen when I worked in Baja, where some of the people that basically took control of the area went away. They were arrested by federal authorities and or captured, or some of them were killed. You would see the people that they would use to move things and or to move money and or basically stall in a wait and see type pattern. I mean, there was a case of this banker guy who was managing a bunch of accounts that was later caught by he basically stole a bunch of money from this cartel guy that got killed. So he was trying to figure out how to shovel that money into this weird investment, and I think he got caught that way. But a lot of these, they're in the stage of warfare right now, so that is completely unattached to some of the aspects of how they keep their business run. I mean, you have people on the hillsides growing things for them still. That I've heard this. You have people still basically managing some of their houses and their drop sites in places like Baja, and you still have people on the U.S. side who have communications and or some sort of allegiance to them still active. So things are still moving. So there's this whole rumor that he was there for this arrest and he escaped through a tunnel. The head of the head of national intelligence Harfouche came out and said that he wasn't, that they were really prioritizing the targets that they got. So he's denying it. So who knows? I mean, if I was him, I probably wouldn't be in Culiacan. Legit.
No.
I would not be in Culiacan. I would be I would be in somewhere where I have friends, not in Culiacan.
Right.
So I don't think he's there myself. A lot of these high level guys have a way of working remotely, and I think in some way, shape, or form, the job the job and organization is still being done remotely, and there was a war effort being done on the ground in Culiacan by some of these people that are getting caught up now by the federal government.
Do you think it's a war of attrition? Like if both sides can keep their business operating separately from the fighting, doesn't it seem like the fighting is all just over beef and not really about money anymore?
I mean, it is of attrition. I mean, they're robbing graves. They're burning each other's houses. There's a famous YouTuber whose parents' house was shot up and burned, who has clear ties to Los Chapitos. A bunch of actually famous YouTubers who had ties to Los Chapitos from Culiacan, who basically became famous for their relationships and for them showing up at weird parties and being funny around some of these cartel members, have been shot as well. So it is. I mean, I think that this is now beyond any sort of strategic thing. They're trying to take each other out.
It's completely out of control. And I guess it's been simmering for so long.
Yeah. I mean, and also, the betrayal aspect of it. I mean, the criminality being what it is. I mean, betrayal of this level is like a universal language, I think. And handing over a figure like that, I think, has and the consequences that it's going to have on people that they deem as responsible. I mean,
right.
I think I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some sort of organized attempt at some of. El Chapo has family in the U.S., right, and they're probably hiding somewhere. I'm waiting for some sort of movement on the U.S. side between these families as well, because if it is a war of attrition, it's something that's probably going to bleed out of Culiacan eventually. We haven't seen anything outside of a few assassinations in places like Mexico City, where we saw this European cartel connected gang member being shot at a parking lot that had a fake DEA badge who was connected to those Mayos.
Wow.
But like I'm waiting for something to happen in the U.S., but I just don't know why we're not seeing that right now. But eventually, when things die down in Culiacan, I think we're probably going to see something stateside.
Yeah, I don't know how that wraps up. If they catch Yvonne, maybe the government goes in and decapitates the rest of the command. Like, how do you, like in a government sanctioned war, one side eventually just gets so demolished and demoralized, they lose all their land, and they just say, okay, we're going to go turn ourselves in. We're going to surrender. But how does that work with a fractured drug cartel? Like, you can't kill everybody on one side. There's thousands of people and associates, and people are like, how does that repair itself? Or do they just go to work for the winner? Right.
They go to work for the winner. Historically, that's how it's always been. Like, hey, this car shop is pretty good at building hides and vehicles. Yeah. And the guy that used to manage him is dead. Cool. Who are we working for now? And people will show up and tell them, like, you work for us now. It's like it happens. It's a change of management. Somebody will show up and have a talk with you, and it's a change of management. But with a place like Culiacan, with all the heat it's on right now, I don't know. I guess the reason why nothing has changed in Mexico for decades is because the heat has never been consistent.
It does seem like the game of, like, starting from Mayo's time in the 80s, the whole cycle was one guy gets big, he gets informed on by one of his partners, he gets knocked off. Next guy takes his place. Next guy. The buck kind of stops with him. They've got nobody else to go after besides the politicians. So after all of this is done, and after the Chapitos are gone, and all of anybody connected to Chapo that's active is incarcerated or just retired or in hiding, Same with the Mayos. There's that whole let's grab a guy, that whole kingpin strategy for the U.S., like these targets that we like, these really convenient like scapegoats, those will all be gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it seems like the war is even more hopeless.
I don't know. I think, again, I've seen this before. A large organization fractures into two. Then it gets prioritized by the government, and the organization goes away and gets fractured in its small independent parts. And among these independent parts, somebody comes up, and now you have a new organization, or somebody from the outside comes in. So we've seen a single arrest of a high-ranking member of the Northwestern Cartel, for example. I'm about to actually go to Monterey and talk to one of the state cops that works that whole region. Their unit has been hit by IEDs and drones and like that. So this is recent. So whatever is happening is still happening across the country. Whatever this people thinking that there's some sort of die down of cartel activity or violence in Mexico, or no. But they've only had one guy, a high level guy, being arrested from that organization. They still ask the president of Mexico almost on a daily basis if El Mencho is alive or not, and the Mexican government doesn't have an answer for that. They don't know if he's alive or not. They just know that he has kidney problems. He's always had kidney problems. That's something I've heard when I was active almost 10 years ago. Right. So, and I just came from Jalisco a few weeks ago, and they're still there. They're still around. So.
Yeah. Who controls the port of Manzanillo? There's a ton of product. There's a lot of meth leaving that port, and then a lot of precursors coming in through that port. Who's really controlling that right now?
The Mexican Marines are the ones that officially control that port and control all federal ports coming in and out of Mexico. And the New Generation Cartel is the one that is in charge of that specific port. So, again, if people are looking for direct ties between the federal government and some of these criminal organizations, how can all these things come into the country and go up into the U.S. without having some sort of deal done with these members of the military that control some of these ports? And also, why are a bunch of them being assassinated every now and then? What's going on there?
Right.
There's been some very interesting targeted high-level assassinations of admirals and people that have been in charge of some of these ports, specifically that port of Manzanillo. So what's going on there? For me, it's always fascinating seeing the denial aspect that Mexicans have. Some Mexicans have who are very loyalist to the federal government, who are nah, this is just being utilized as an excuse for the U.S. Well, yeah, it is, but it's still true that they're being the government is corrupt and the military is corrupt here, right? Yeah. So there's this denial aspect of it. And on the U.S. side, they don't, I see some signs of they're not buying into the federal government's anymore. They're still putting pressure on. But then you hear the president talk we had a conversation, we're cool. She put some troops on the border, everything's fine. Yeah.
Are those troops doing anything on the border, by the way?
I mean, they look cool and walking around in white multicam in the middle of the brown desert, I mean, they're scaring poor people that can't afford a professional smuggler from crossing the border.
Right.
The thing with that is Trump said they were going to put 20,000 troops on the border was the thing. Well, the trick was that they were already on the border. There was 4,000 of them in Tijuana alone, I think, before that petition was issued. So there was a big scramble to make these symbolic flights of troops from Mexico City to Tijuana, and you would see these planes show up with 40 people, 40 agents coming out of those planes, and a big spectacle of them being in Mexico. But nothing has changed. I mean, Tijuana. They left a head recently in front of a government building. There's 2, 3, 4, 5 murders every night. People are getting abducted. There's a lot of paid extortion going on all over the country, all over the city. So like I get a lot of news because of the people that still live there that kind of that talk about some of this. So like I'm looking directly at the effects of that surge of federal agents on the border, and maybe they're scaring off a few poor migrants that want to cross that border through some of the gaps on the border fence, but that's about it. I mean, they're not really making everybody feel safe because now they're here, you know?
Yeah. And that's the Guardia Nacional too, which you were telling us when we were down there is the most worthless, underpaid government body, right?
I mean, it's when I started in 2004, I would drive around a bunch of soldiers dressed in gray in the back of my truck to patrol the city. And now there's a bunch of dudes in the back of trucks patrolling the cities dressed in white and gray, right? So they only added a single color to their uniform and they're doing exactly the same thing. I mean, these are criminals. They're smart. They know when to go out. They know to use grandmothers with tortilla baskets to move cocaine through the city to the stash house. They know, they know to pay off local cops that will tell them where the federal forces are. They have camera systems throughout the city that they're hidden and they can see troop movements. A bunch of army guys in the back of trucks that are marked. They're not going to. I mean, it's business as usual. Like there's nothing is going to be done with them.
Ed, before we get out of here, I want to talk about some of the other areas, the hot zones in Mexico. You mentioned like the East, Monterrey, and that whole area, like Nuevo Laredo. Those are like infamous for just constantly having like brutal violence and infighting from different clans, right? Why is the East so much more corrupt? Like, why are they able to have the military and the cops so much more in their pocket on the east side of Mexico as opposed to like TJ and the western side?
That's a great question. I think it's probably related to the big aspect of how rural some of it is. I mean, it's vast, expansive, just desert and rural areas. There's a pretty interesting collection of money in the form of Monterey and some of the people that live there and the ways that these old wealthy families and industry around these wealthy families in this very opulent part of Mexico and how that leads to money laundering and people moving in and out of that area, kind of like utilizing that aspect of that part of the country to move their money and influence and basically, manage and maintain drug routes that go right into the upper Texas corridor up into the U.S. I think that corridor itself is the one that feeds most of the East Coast. Yeah. So there's a ton of money in that area. Historically now the Northwest Cartel del Noroeste is the one that has had the most power in that area. This is a cartel that is hyper militaristic in its ways. They took a lot of notes from Los Zetas. They took a lot of notes from some of the Gulf cartel era operations and basically turned themselves into a very hyper militarized cartel with capabilities that are interesting. I mean, one of the guys that I'm about to talk to this weekend is a state cop who runs in an operations group very much like the one that I used to work in. And these guys are carrying around grenade launchers and like 50 cals and stuff like that. So he's saying that a lot of the stuff they're seeing right now are basically roadside mines, IEDs, with syringe plungers. Being utilized as detonation devices. So you put a syringe with the actuator. So when the truck falls over, it presses the plunger and it actuates these explosives. The explosives that are being utilized are mining level explosives. And the charges are very reminiscent of stuff that you would see in Colombia with some of the FARC units, which makes sense because a lot of the weird weaponology and the explosives and stuff like that are influenced by American servicemen coming back from the Middle East. Some of it is that influence, but a big part of it is IRA people went down to Colombia in the 80s and 90s and trained the FARC forces. Yeah. So the IRA method and ways of blowing people up have made their way up into Mexico from Colombia, from some of these people that learned that trade craft back then.
And so and the Northwest Cartel is the most dominant. What is the difference between them and the Gulf Cartel?
They're just name and leadership, but they're basically related in a lot of ways as far as how they came up and the structures around them.
Right.
The Northwestern Cartel, I think what I see in them is basically youth, and what comes with this, this unrestrained way of doing things is hyperviolence, and also that area has a history of it. I mean, restraint is something you usually find in a territory that is uncontested and controlled. Culiacan used to be restrained until recently.
Right.
But that area is constantly under threat and constantly being fought over because, again, it's the richest corridor that feeds the eastern part of the United States with its habit, and
it's so vast too. There's a lot of room for competition to come in.
Yeah, and
it creates
again,
more fighting.
And Mexico doesn't have a lot of air power to patrol its territory, so they're not doing anything. It has drones, but there's like a few of them. And I already talked to somebody that works on the Mexican Army drone program, and he was laughing at me, saying that most of their drones fit in a small warehouse. I mean, there's basically nobody supervising or looking after a vast swaths of Mexico's northeastern border at all. I mean,
and unlike the bad luck of the Sinaloa cartel, those guys don't have a brand. Like Americans don't know the Northwest Cartel. There's no figurehead that Americans can point to. You're not yet. You're right.
It's interesting when they do become a brand. That's when I always tell people, like, why him? Like with El Chapo Guzman, like why El Chapo Guzman? Realistically, like why him? Why Rolling Stone? Why Sean Penn?
Right.
Because
you know why? Because that's what they call in the business of show business, the intangible quality. He's just got it.
Yeah.
Why does this guy get famous in comedy and this other guy who's funnier doesn't?
Yeah.
That's Sinaloa, Chapo, just the names are cool. You know? I think that's part of it. I think in the Robin Hood aspect too, like we're drug dealers, we're not terrorists. Like blowing up, setting IUDs. I mean, what is the difference between that and Al Qaeda? There's no difference.
I guess the only difference is they're not speaking Arabic and they're not like overseas somewhere really far away. They're really nearby, and it's definitely. Trump has 4 years to do something, and I think if he folds in any way, shape, or form with the pressure on the federal government in Mexico to basically not only get Archivaldo, but maybe hand him over, I think then we're going to probably see a repetition of what we did in his first term, and a lot of pressure, a lot of rhetoric, and Mexico is still where it was. We haven't seen them move after U.S. money or companies that have ties to these cartels. We haven't seen any of that. I haven't seen any. We haven't seen any part of that designation being utilized in the financial sector. I think that's so. Like, why isn't that happening?
What about the special forces? In the other day,
the Senate approved the access of 10 members of the Army Special Forces to train the military in Mexico, which is something that happens every few years. It was waved as a big "we won" flag by certain members of the U.S. Politicians, but it is business as usual. I mean, it's 10 SF guys going down to train the Mexican Marines and some of the Mexican top tier units within the Army, which is something that's happened many times before.
I mean, I think probably the Sinaloa, the Mayos probably have that many guys training their own sicarios.
Oh, there's rumors. There's rumors of some ex-Army, ex-military, U.S. military special operators training different members of the cartel forces, including at least one that I can speak about directly. There's there's a former MARSOC guy or some sort of a special operations guy that used to be a part of the Marines who has appeared many times in training camps up in Michoacan and Jalisco. But 10 guys coming down to train people. It isn't a call for victory that the U.S. just won. It's
right.
It's access to Mexico. Mexico is still being antagonistic against the U.S. Mexico still doesn't want to cave into the U.S.'s demands.
What ends migration big time is a huge recession in the U.S. Is hey, there's layoffs of everybody, so there's no incentive for somebody from Venezuela to come up.
Yeah.
Right? It's probably a correction. I don't know if that's going to happen. I kind of doubt it'll get that bad. I think they'll start printing money again pretty soon if there's more of like a correction in the stock market than there already was. But it sounds like Sheinbaum and the political party in power in Mexico is they're between a rock and a hard place, because they know if they allow drone striking, their party's Mexicans don't want that.
It's political suicide to be in any way, shape, or form seen as somebody that bows to American interest. Although the last president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, sent a bunch of troops to the border and bowed to American interest. So it's a game. And I think right now what I would tell people to look at directly is part of this game where they're denying any sort of relationship to Mayo Zambada and the Sinaloa cartel as far as political supporters. But now we're seeing this whole connection with this lawyer and the legal firm that works for him, for Mayo Zambada, and his connection to the Morena party all throughout the last administration and beyond.
Wow. Such crazy things are going to happen in the coming months. I can't wait. And it sounds like a lot of things will just go back to business as usual as well.
I have a feeling deep down in my heart that this is all gonna fizzle out. I'm hopeful it doesn't. That then there's something that is, definitely changes. I mean, legit, I think we're witnessing the end of the Sinaloa cartel as we knew it. I think Los Chapitos are going to be a thing of the past pretty soon. Mm-hmm. But I don't see the other large organizations going away. I've seen some high-level arrests. Some pressure is on, but again, I was just in Jalisco, and they're running around.
They're rocking and rolling, right?
Yeah, they're moving around.
And are they pretty out in the open in Jalisco? Like, I know that in Michoacan, it's basically lawless. They control everything in the mountains. What's going on in Jalisco and the south?
In some of the rural parts of Jalisco, basically, is where you'll see, these trucks show up and gas up in a town with things strapped to the back of them and technicals and shit like that. They're not worried about a Mexican gunship flying overhead and shooting at them, so that's what makes me pause. I mean, okay, so these guys are business as usual. But I imagine in Culiacan, they're pretty underground. I mean, they're running through tunnels and stuff like that. So is this going to be a blanketed effort, or are we just witnessing we're going to target these guys first and then we're going to go after these? And there's a strategy there, which if there is, well, cool. I could see it. I could see this divide and conquer strategy maybe. But I don't know. Again, I don't know. I think
it sounds like the best thing for everybody, and by everybody I mean everybody but the people, the citizens. But it sounds like the best thing for the cartels, for the politicians on both sides of the border, is that Yvonne gets arrested, that Chapitos, there's big headlines that Chapitos have fallen, and then we all go have lunch.
Yep. That's I think the outcome that the outcome that I think is probably going to happen. This new figure of this new old Chapo Guzman and the figure of his son being arrested, paraded in front of the media. Yeah. And people saying our job here is done, just like Tuxedo Man in the Sailor Moon. He would show up and just say some advice and leave and not do anything. Right. Something like that I think is probably maybe going to happen. Everybody's excited about troops on the ground and these special forces guys coming down and taking on the cartels, but I don't see it, man. I don't see it.
Well, we witnessed it. We witnessed
change,
it in. Sorry, go ahead.
Any sort of fundamental change that is going to do anything is going to involve the federal government or somebody in the federal government being arrested and or found out or exposed.
Wow.
I think if that happens, then I'll sit down with my popcorn and say that, you know what, I think there's some fundamental thing that's about to change.
Okay, so why? If say like the number 3 person in the government of Mexico, in Mexico City, gets arrested for blatant corruption from, taking money from Mayo and God knows who else, what would that signal? Would that tell other politicians we can't take bribes from cartels anymore?
Yeah, I mean, imagine it's funny that most of the ex-presidents of Mexico live in Spain right now for some reason. So imagine we see Felipe Calderon on the news in handcuffs because, I don't know, he was found out to have direct ties to one cartel or the other. Or we see an arrest warrant being issued for former President Andres Manuel López Obrador by the U.S. because of clear cartel ties and stuff like that. Wow. I think that is going to be a big precedent as far as like what happens after that. Right.
Okay, so say that happened. Now politicians can't take drug money anymore. That would affect how cartels do business. They could no longer be these outward militaristic organizations because they're all going to go to jail or get killed like they would in the U.S., right? Yeah. And then everybody gets, and then society calms down and there's still drugs moving and there's still humans getting smuggled, but it's just a more law and order based society versus one that's driven by crime first.
Yeah, it's in the whole aspect of this being in the open. I mean, I always mention this when I first started working. There were cartel convoys in the middle of the day rolling around with AKs outside the window,
right
in the middle of the city, and everybody was looking at them. Nobody was doing.
That's in Tijuana, which is so insane because you could see downtown San Diego.
Yeah,
and that was going on just 15 years ago. That was going on.
Yeah, and that's gone. And now we're at a point where the only thing that is exposed or that you can really see is Mayo Zambada's lawyer hanging out with the president. So that's the in the open aspect of this now. So I don't know, like that's something. If that happens, if they target, like they already targeted a general and they let him go. Like I'm waiting for a president's name to be dropped as somebody of interest, or an open U.S. investigation on a former Mexican president.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
If that happens, I'll sit down and eat some popcorn and say like, oh, okay, this is going to be interesting.
Hey, buddy, I wouldn't hold my breath.
I mean, there's 2 of them in Spain right now hiding, having the time of their lives for some reason in Spain.
A lot of cats from Sinaloa in Spain too, getting money.
So again, like people in Mexico always come up with this argument where like, well, you're just defending the former presidents and like you're all about the other party. Like they're all, all of them are in on it.
Yeah. Well, my prediction is just like most things, violence will not do it. The technology and more opulence and affluence, which can only happen through time, is what will do it. That's my prediction. And so it's not going to be. It's going to be a few decades at least, I think. But
yeah, I think money, and the U.S.'s interest for an industrial base and manufacturing base outside of China.
Yeah,
is the main push, not the fentanyl epidemic, which is not even it's not what it was.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's the change actually will come with America first.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to a bunch of reporters from the UK recently, and they were in LA first, and then they came down to Tijuana, and they're like, has the fentanyl pipeline to the United States been affected in any way, shape, or form? And I told them, like, you were just in LA, right? Yeah. What do you think? And they were like, oh, well, what did you see? A lot of people walking around like zombies. So I think the pipeline is whatever is feeding that is still active, and there's nothing has changed with all the military presence on that border.
Do you know anybody that does coke that can't find coke anywhere? What is the price?
I don't know anybody that does coke.
Has the price gone up? Has the price gone up of anything? No. That should tell you something.
Yeah, like all the people that I know that know other people that might use the substance, they are not kind of like, wow, holy man, like I can't find any, or it's still there. No price fluctuations, no massive issues in hospitals for people going through withdrawals because they can't get their supply. None of that, which would be indicators that something is actually shifting and changing fundamentally with the drug trade. But you're just not seeing it. So
last question. I heard that in Culiacan, New York Times ran a big article about how they're basically like making magic potions of different fentanyl batches because the fentanyl's gotten weaker, they say. And so they buy bunny rabbits from pet stores and they test the new batches on them. And if the bunnies die, that means it's good fentanyl, which is wild. It's such a Mexican thing. It's so dark and funny. But have precursors, has there been a dent in the precursors coming over from China? Like, has there been increased enforcement on that at all?
I haven't heard anything about increased enforcement on precursors or lack thereof. I have heard of the addition of tranquilizer. Have you ever heard about that?
Yeah.
Trank is being added to some batches, and it's not even about the unavailability of fentanyl or precursors. It's more about they're trying to figure out how to not kill, or like come up with something that won't kill people.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
I don't know about bunny rabbits. I mean, some of the people that I've talked to about this type of stuff, they're like people. They're like, hey, you, súbete al carro, like get in the car.
Oh, yeah.
Right, like try this. Now, that's what I've heard, like people.
Right.
But I don't know. But
certainly overdoses have really come down in the U.S. So it either means the population, it's probably a combination of things. The population is getting tolerant to it.
I think the medical industry is getting really good at dealing with fentanyl overdoses because they know what's going on. There's a bunch of Narcan everywhere. Mm-hmm. Like I went to Seattle and I got a backpack full of it, They were like just giving it out with crack pipes and needles. So I was like, well, I'll take some of these, I guess, It's better than Afrin. But whatever this attempt that they're like, everybody's kind of like making to make the central feature of this drug war, or now war on terror, because I think the drug war is over now, making fentanyl central to this, have to really kind of reanalyze that. Because people are wise to some of it. There's some pretty at-risk people who don't give a shit, who will inject, piss into their veins that have mental issues, that living on the street that might not fit into this category. But people are wise to it. People are careful with their drugs. People are like worried about putting a pill in their mouth if they're not too sure about it. So the drug culture has changed. Yeah. The medical industry has changed around fentanyl and the drug culture as well. So they're getting pretty good at keeping people alive.
It seems like the central issue, you're right, shouldn't be the drugs. It should be organizing the border, organizing the migration so they're not exploited by cartels. But really, it's taking down the political elite in Mexico.
Yeah.
And Mayo could hold the keys to that.
That guy he's an atomic weapon. He is a weapon of mass destruction. Like if people would go down to Mexico, look for a weapon of mass destruction, he is it. He is the weapon of mass destruction. He has a ledger
so
that goes
crazy.
back 50 years at least.
Wow. He's become a political linchpin. He's so much more than a drug dealer. He's a spy. He's a diplomat. He's a politician.
Yeah.
How everything we just talked about, how is he not a politician who traffics drugs? It's absolutely mind-blowing.
The only thing that people should pay attention to in his letter is that if his issue isn't resolved, that it will destabilize relationships between the United States and Mexico. He is a very calculated person. Why did he put that in that letter?
It's unbelievable. He even uses the propaganda of politicians.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Well, we'll see. We'll tap back in because I think something is going to happen soon with that, in the next couple of months.
I'm keeping tabs on it myself. Okay. Again, I'm about to go to Monterey and talk to some of the people that are fighting it on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Which is something you don't hear that much about. So that's why I'm going out there to talk to some of these guys out there who are on the front lines. And again, with my whole thing with this whole issue is advocacy. I have friends. I went on this giant podcast in Mexico with Dafe. And that reconnected me with a bunch of the people that I used to work with who thought I was dead or MIA or they didn't know what the happened to me. All of a sudden I show up on this really weird popular podcast in Mexico speaking about my experiences, and they're like, holy shit, this guy's alive. Yeah. And a lot of them have reconnected, and man, some of the stories I'm getting from them, and also some of the details about what's going on. A lot of them, like myself, had a lot of training, and a lot of them are now federally placed in high levels federally. Some of them are in some of these SF units, and they're all over this current wave of it. And they're like, hey, man, this feels like the kickoff, like 2006 again. That's what they're all saying. It feels like 2006 all over again, which in some ways makes you think well, maybe this time it's something that's going to change everything, or this is just a snake biting its tail again, and it's all gonna settle down into 2 or 3 large organizations again who are kind of low key underground and paid for, and business as usual. I don't know.
Another 400,000 murders, and 15 years from now we'll be talking about the same thing. So hopefully it doesn't go that way. And Mexico's got a lot of good cops. I'm talking to one of them, even though people think you're not from Mexico and you're a CIA agent.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah.
That's how stupid Americans are. We don't get. We see somebody that can speak 2 languages flawlessly, and we're like, oh, he's a plant.
Yeah, I'm a plant.
He knows Jeffrey Epstein.
I spoke to my boss for 4 hours on a podcast, but that somehow I can't speak Spanish, and I'm a CIA plant. It's cool. I love it though.
We love you, man. We love you. This was enlightening. Let's tap back in when we hear more. I mean, the next time we talk, Yvonne could be arrested. That's how fast these guys are getting knocked off. So we will wait and see. But go check out his podcast. Go check out Manifest Radio Podcast. For the love of God, he has all the details that we talk about. He's talking to the actual people in Mexico that live it and experience it. So Ed, go plug away again before we get out of here.
Manifesto Radio Podcast on YouTube and Manifesto Radio Podcast on Instagram. As soon as anything moves, Johnny, we'll come out and talk to you about it. I've always appreciated the way that you and I talk about some of these things, because both of us were in it for a while, and then we don't want to, now we're not, and we can, speak about some of the aspects of this honestly. This whole aspect for me is about speaking about the truths of some people that went through it, and the good and the bad, and also the experience that comes out of it, and how to make a positive out of it. On my end, I'm just trying to bring a voice of a lot of voiceless people like myself who are eaten up by the system in Mexico and spat out.
Yeah. And I'm doing it because, money and
yes.
And that hasn't changed. No, I'm doing it because I love Mexico, because I feel a kinship, and yeah, I'd probably move in there. So I'd really like things to settle down.
Come down to Mexico City. It's a great place.
Yeah, man. All right. Well, we're gonna get out of here. Go watch Manifesto Radio podcast. Go follow him. Best Instagram follow in the Americas is Ed. I'm serious. Is Ed on? I steal a lot of his clips for my own reuse on my own Instagram. So go check him out. But watch that podcast, and we're gonna get back together very soon. Ed, thank you so much, my man.
Thank you, brother.
We'll talk to you later. Take care, guys.